What's up, meeples? Hello, everyone. This is Helena, and today I am here with Gil Hova from Formal Ferret Games. Hi, Jill.
Hello, it's Gil.
Oh, it's
Archie.
Gil. Yeah,
Yep, that's okay. With Europeans call
yeah.
me Gil, and that's not terrible.
It's not. It's my French language skills that I have been trying to develop over time. So we're here with Gil today, and we're going to be talking about his newest Kickstarter, which is now live. This is High Rise. You can find the link for this in the description of the video. If you would like to ask Gil something about the Kickstarter or anything that we discussed during the chat, then make sure to drop it in the comments, and we'll try to answer everything as soon as possible because there is some lag between what you see on Facebook and what we are actually discussing.
Yep.
So, Gil, it's been
Yes.
a long time. It's been since Essen.
Yes. Yeah, it's been a while.
It has been. How's everything been since then?
It's been very busy, extremely busy, because I've been really consumed with this high-rise Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I should say the high-rise Kickstarters, because I originally launched a month ago, and I took the project down after a day, spent 4 weeks retooling it, and now we're back and thankfully doing much better.
So, you took that decision within a day. Most people wait for like 5 days before they decide that. Um, at least in my experience. So, how did you decide to take it down in a day? What led you to that decision?
A lot of feedback from the community, and seeing like day one generally is a really good indication of how your project is going to do when you look at how your campaign's doing relative
Yeah.
to the funding goal.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't that close to the funding goal, and we were getting a lot of feedback saying this is really too expensive, and I felt so much better when I canceled the campaign. So once I did that, I realized, okay, this is the right choice. I'm doing the right thing. Then I spent 4 weeks retooling the game so that it could be much cheaper. Even though we technically have less money now than when we canceled the original campaign,
Mm-hmm.
we have more backers
Okay.
because the pledge level is lower. And we're much closer to the funding goal because I was able to drop the funding goal. So this is a much more realistic campaign. Also, I feel like I'm giving more people what they want, and I think that's reflected in the backer numbers. And overall, I think most people are happy with the change, and they're excited about the game. And I think it's a stronger game right now, also the way it is. Though I will miss the stackable plastic, and hopefully at some point I can bring the stackable plastic back.
I'd like to say hi to all the people who are watching us. So, hi, Jason. Hi, John. Hi, Lake. Hi, Brian. It's very nice to have you here. We're here with Gil discussing about the relaunch of his Kickstarter campaign, High Rise. You can find the link in the description. Take a look at the game and see if it interests you. Drop a question in the comments here, and we'll make sure to answer that. So, for us as the people who are watching now are taking a look at the Kickstarter, please go ahead and tell us a few things about the game and what it's all about.
Okay, so High Rise is a game of construction and corruption for 1 to 4 players. That is the game's official tagline. You are going around a city that has a one-way time track, similar if you played games like Tokaido or Glenmore, similar mechanism. So if you're furthest behind on the time track, it'll be your turn, and you can move to any unoccupied space ahead of you. Whatever space you land on, whatever space you choose to land on, that action is what you do. And then you wait for everybody to catch up and pass you, and then it's your turn again. So you can make a really big move and move far away from everybody else. That's totally fine because it's going to be a while until things will catch up to you again. So that said, it's a game of construction because every action you're going to do is going to give you construction materials or give you some other interesting benefit here and there. And somebody's ringing my doorbell, but they're just going to have to wait.
You can answer that, and I can cover the time. Really?
No, it's fine. It's probably someone here to read the meter. They can come back. So,
If it was a Kickstarter delivery, though, you would have opened the door. I'm sure about that. Sorry, let's go on.
yeah. So every action you do, you're going to out some construction materials, or you're going to get some other benefit. And then some actions on the board will let you take those construction materials and convert them into a building. You build with the construction materials according to a blueprint. There's 5 different colors of resources, and you look at the different colors needed on the blueprint, and you try to collect those colors and turn them into a building. You get 1 point for each resource. Each resource is a floor, so every floor you have in your building is 1 point. You can get bonus floors, which translate to bonus points, by being first to a blueprint or doing a couple of other things. And then the height of your building is important, because at the end of the round, once everybody's out to the start of the board on the action track, whoever has the tallest building in each of the 5 neighborhoods gets a bonus. So you want to build frequently to get powers, and you want to build tall. Oh, getting powers. Every time you build, you're going to put it on what we call a tenant. And the tenant is a card that you set up at the start of the game, and that gives you a certain power. So wherever you build is going to get you a special power as well as points, and then when you go around, the height of your building determines if you get bonus points.
Sounds like a game with deep strategy and that has lots of things going on. So would you say that it is a medium or more like a heavy game?
I'd say it's just a notch above medium, I'd say.
Okay, fair enough. Another thing that I actually like about the game is the fact that you offer different modes of play. So you have an introductory mode, a standard mode, and a full mode. So talk to us a bit about those, please.
Yes, so the modes are based on the rounds of the game, and a round is when everybody's made a full lap around the board. And a lap around the board takes, I'd say, between 45 and 50 minutes based on how fast the players are. And so when I originally was designing the game, it was 3 rounds, because that felt good. It was 3 rounds. You didn't start with anything on the board, and there was a couple of other little things that compensated for turn order. So I was testing this, and it was great. People really enjoyed it. The only problem is games were well over 2 hours, which isn't terrible, but I know a lot of people don't necessarily like games that are over 2 hours, and I felt like there was an opportunity to explore, well, what if there's a way that I can make this work under 2 hours? So I said, all right, let's try playing only 2 rounds. And I did, but that was not satisfying to just play 2 rounds without any sort of special rules. So I started developing some special rules, and what I found is if I set the players up with buildings on the board to begin the game, that actually helped a lot, because it's as if you finished the first round and you were diving into the second round. It wasn't totally a replacement. Like, I've known there's a few testers who actually prefer the full game, the 3-round game, which is why I left it as an option. I actually really enjoy the full game also. I feel like there's enough going on that it justifies the play length. But if you don't have 3 hours, you can play it in under 2 hours with the short mode. Now, that left one problem, because at the start of the game, you draft the spaces you go on. You choose what tenant your starting building is going to go on, which is great if you played the game before, but not so great if you haven't, because now you have to scan along like 15, 20 tenants. So what I did is I created a 3rd mode. That's the intro mode. So what the intro mode does is it just tells you, okay, your player 1, this is the tenant you start on. Your player 2, this is the tenant you start on. And I was able to better compensate for turn order that way. So it took a couple more tweaking and fiddling, but I was able to get the game working in 2 rounds where new players can just put their buildings down and go, and play in under 2 hours. Another interesting thing, one more really interesting thing about these differences is there's this mechanism in the game that I haven't mentioned yet that's actually really important. It's called corruption. So when you land on an action space, you do something, but you can optionally boost the action by taking corruption. But at the end of the round, you'll get a penalty if you have most corruption, and at the end of the game, you lose points based on how much corruption you have, with the players with the most corruption losing even more points. So that worked really well in a 3-player game. But with a 2-player game, there were strategies that you couldn't get away with. Like, if you got a lot of corruption in the first round of the standard game, the short game, that meant you were out of it because you didn't have enough time to lose that corruption. In a 3-round game, you can gain a lot of corruption in the first 2 rounds, and you can spend the 3rd round trying to lose that corruption. You might get away with it. You couldn't do that in the shorter game, which bothered me. So I realized I had to change the penalty for most corruption for the intro and the standard game, but that solution wasn't right for the full game. So that's another difference between the two. And it was really interesting to see these new patterns of play start emerging with a shorter game and seeing what was interesting and trying to guide gamers' plays so that the two-player game continued to be interesting. And I finally found something where the game automatically removes corruption for the players with the most corruption at the end of the round, but they get a big penalty. And then at the end of the game, you score it as normal. And that worked really well. So I was really happy to see that.
So, since you've described us all the three different modes of play that the game has, during the playtest that you did with other people, who had or hadn't played the game before, could you actually say if there is a preferred mode of play?
If you've never played before, I would suggest intro. If you've played before but you don't have 2 hours to play, then I would suggest the standard game, the standard 2-round game where you draft buildings. Otherwise, I would recommend the full game. Those are my recommendations. Personally, my favorite way of playing is the full game, but I don't think that's realistic for everyone. So that's why I have the other 2 modes in, to make sure that it works in just about any gaming situation for that kind of game.
Makes sense. Busy lives, works, family, you need to keep everything balanced and fit a game in between.
Yeah.
So this also has a solo mode.
Yes.
Does the solo mode fit in any of the gameplay modes that you just described, or does it work totally differently?
The solo mode is the full game, but it's quick enough that it's going to take about 90 minutes, or possibly shorter if you do a bad job. So the way that it works, the solo mode, is I mentioned that corruption, and I mentioned blueprints. There's 5 blueprints on each blueprint card. Mm-hmm. Well, there's going to be a tile that comes out on each of those 5 blueprints with a number between about 3 and 7. That number is the amount of corruption you must have or less in order to continue playing the game at the end of the round. Mm-hmm. Now, every time you construct a blueprint, you're going to remove one of those tiles. So those tiles on each blueprint are going to go away, and at the end of the round, there's only going to be 1 tile left. If there's more than 1 tile left, you're going to discard randomly until there's 1 tile left. And whatever that number is, you better have that corruption or less, or you lose. So what this does is it means in the solo game, which blueprint you build is really important, because if there's one with like the number 3, and you've got like 7 corruption, you want to build that building to knock that out. Now, if you go to one of the 4 building areas on the board and you don't build, then one of those tokens gets removed randomly, and then so you're not sure exactly which of the tokens is going to go away. The token that goes away might be the 7, which might make your game a lot harder, because if you have a lot of corruption, you really want that 1 token to stay. So there's some tricky parts in the solo game that really keep your interest, because I found this is something I learned with the networks. It really helps to have these mid-game goals, because if you just say, okay, just play for the high score, it kind of gets boring at the start of the game because you don't have anything really quickly to work towards. But if you've got this goal that you've got to survive through the first third of the game, you've got something short-term to play towards, and I think that's really important. Another aspect of the solo game that's also in the 2-player game is there's a dummy player. And dummy players usually, they don't really work in a lot of games. They're just sort of a kludge. But the way they work in High Rise is actually kind of cool. When it comes time to move a dummy player, in a 2-player game it alternates who controls the dummy player. In the solo game you control 2 dummy players. By control I mean when it's the turn of a dummy player to move, the dummy player either goes to a prescribed spot on the board, and the rules tell you exactly where it will move relative to wherever you are on the board right now, or you can control the dummy player and move them to a pretty good range of spots on the board, but if you do that, you take a corruption. And obviously in the solo game, this is really rough, because you don't want to have too much corruption in the solo game. So in the solo game, the dummy players are going to be removing options from the board unless you pay corruption, but if you do that too much, you're going to lose. I see Lake is asking a question about the corruption.
Yes, he has a question about the corruption and whether it works similar to Cthulhu games where you have madness that drives the players mad. And this is actually a very interesting question because it might help people, have a reference as to how things
Yeah.
work a bit.
Yeah, originally, if you've ever played London, I had it. I actually started when I playtested the game. I used the poverty mechanism for London, and then I just started tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it,
Okay.
and now it's totally different. The way it works now is kind of like if you've ever played High Society or Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. They have a mechanism where they have a condition where a player who either in Cleopatra it's the player with the most corruption, in High Society it's the poorest player. That player is eliminated. This is sort of like that, except that it's much softer. It's a much softer penalty. So it can still hit you really hard, but it's possible to have most corruption and win. So in terms of madness in a Cthulhu game, it's similar to that, but with the condition that you might still be able to win even if you have most corruption. But you have to be very careful and mindful of how you play. If you just take corruption any opportunity you can and you don't pay attention to anything else, you're going to lose a lot of points at the end of the game.
This kind of leads to what I was thinking before, and I wanted to ask you, would you describe the game as unforgiving with the whole corruption mechanism? Is it difficult to catch up afterwards and maybe win the game?
A lot of, I would say no if you realize early enough. I wouldn't call it unforgiving, and it's gotten more forgiving as I've developed it. That said, there's a few variables here. The first variable are the tenants. I mentioned that there are tenant tiles you lay out at the start of the game. Some of those tenant tiles let you lose corruption. So the more of those tenants that are out, the more forgiving the game is, because the more opportunities you have to lose corruption. Of course, there's other tenants that give you cool things in exchange for corruption. There's never a tenant that just gives you corruption for nothing, because nobody would ever land on it. So instead, there's corruption, but you always get something for the corruption. The question is always, is it worth it? So when you take corruption, generally it's because of decisions you have made. So the game rarely forces corruption on you. And in fact, at the end of each round, the player in last place and the player in second to last place lose corruption. So there's a little bit of what we call a negative feedback loop in the game, where the game tries to soften the blow a little bit for the players who aren't doing as well.
Awesome. So as we discussed earlier, High Rise is a relaunch on Kickstarter now. I wanted to ask you if you could pick like 3 main things that you totally changed from the first Kickstarter to the second. Which would those be?
Well, the first thing that's obvious is removing the stackable plastic. The way the game was, you got construction materials, you got these floors, and you put them in your construction yard. And then when you built a building, when you constructed a building, you follow the blueprint. Let's say the blueprint said I'm going to make up some colors. You take an orange, you take a green, and you take a yellow, and you put them on the board. Well, you actually literally took those materials, and you put them on the board, and those 3 floors are now your building. So the game called for a lot of plastic pieces because a lot of pieces kept on going onto the board and onto the board. And that's why the game was so expensive in the first run, because it needed almost 300 pieces of plastic. And you look at other games,
300 is too much.
Yeah.
Big number.
Like Expansity, for example. Some people are like, well, Expansity doesn't charge that much. Expansity doesn't have 300 stackable plastic pieces. It's got like, I think, 150.
And it's basically the same thing in different colors. Most of the pieces, actually. So you don't have different molds for each of those.
Yeah. Whereas I had a few different molds. I had quite a few different molds. So we had a lot of plastic in the game. So taking out the stackable plastic was the first change. The second change is what we replaced it with. The second change were the new punchboard buildings, which are now punchboard tiles that you put in standees. And I was reluctant to make this change because I was worried it would be a downgrade. Oh, thank you, Zach. Zach is one of my playtesters and also a very good game designer and publisher in his own right. He's got his own company, and he's got a really cool game called Lots that's coming out soon.
Hi, Zach. Nice to have you here. And let's say hello to everybody else who actually joined. So that would be Nick, Lizzie, Tassos, Voikan. Hi, guys. Thanks a lot for joining in. Nice to have you here.
So these new punchboard buildings, what you do is you take that yellow, green, and blue floors, and you put them back in the bag, and you take, in this case, a 3-story building tile and you put it in a standee and you put it out on the board. So at first it was like, oh no, this is just a straight downgrade, right? But then I realized a couple things. Number one, we could actually put Quan Chai's art right on the punch board, and that was an opportunity to feature Quan Chai's Quan Chai Moria. He's the game's illustrator. Quan Chai is a star illustrator right now. He is doing a bunch of amazing work, and I'm so lucky to have him in this project. We've been wanting to work together for years, and he's just a dream to work with, obviously in terms of communication, in terms of responsiveness, but also just in terms of what he does is just unreal. You look at games like, he did all the art for Overlight, the RPG that Renegade just put out.
Yeah.
And it's breathtaking what he did. His big calling card game was Catacombs. But he also did, I'm a big fan of the cover art for Coaster Park. I know the game had a few issues when it came out, but the cover art looked absolutely fantastic, and I think he did a great job on that. There's a new Burnt Island game, Hall of the Mountain King, and he did art for that. He's doing all sorts of art for Capital Lux. That was just an amazing job that he did on that game. So Quan Chai's art is amazing, and I'm super lucky to have him. And when I realized that I could put his art right on the punchboard buildings, I'm like, well, this could be a win. We started using plastic standees, which I was a little worried about. Like, I was like, well, this is going to look cheap. Is this going to look cheap? But it actually works. The standees represent your color, so it's a quick and easy way of seeing what color each player's building is. And honestly, they really don't look too bad. The game looks quite good, even with the punchboard and the plastic standees. And I think the secret is I made the buildings taller. So with the punchboard, the standees are actually taller than how tall the stackable plastic buildings would have been, to the point that I've screwed these measurements up, so let me make sure I got this right. The tallest building in the game is going to be about 230 millimeters,
Okay.
Which is about, I think, 9 inches or so. Gives the game really good table presence. So somebody walking by the game, they're still going to see that verticality, which I think the game really wanted. Now, we experimented with all sorts of other things. We wanted to see if we could do 3D buildings, like 4-sided buildings. Those were going to be much more expensive, and those were going to be a pain. We looked at making the buildings like sort of making them nest together, like photosynthesis, like there should be some photosynthesis, but the buildings would have been too tall for that. And also, buildings kind of don't look like that. I mean, they don't look like flat pieces of cardboard either, but at least that comes off more as an abstraction, whereas once you go into 3D, I think there's an uncanny valley thing that happens. The cardboard actually looks really good, and I'm really, really happy with the look of it. We tried punchboard standees. I was like, okay, what if we got rid of all the plastic and just used punchboard standees? And we tried that, and the buildings fell over if you just looked at them. Whereas with 30mm punchboard standees, they're just fine. They're actually quite stable. They can survive most knocks on the table. And Zach points out that the shadows that they cast are really cool as well.
Indeed, because it's different based on the height of the building. So you did experiment with lots of different materials, and you made significant changes that reduced your cost. And of course, I believe they also reduced the weight of the game, so they had an impact on shipping, and it has an impact on the funding goal. So everything kind of looks easier now that the funding goal is smaller and the pledge levels are lower too. Did you change anything with regards to the way you have been communicating the game and the outreach you had to media, press, reviewers?
Yeah, that was number 3 actually. Was the look of the game on Kickstarter. I think we did a lousy job communicating how the game looked on the first campaign. So what we did is we made sure that we really tried to communicate the game's table presence as best we could when we relaunched. Now, we had a lot more assets. We had a month's additional work of graphic design behind us when we launched the second time. So we were able to provide a much more specific picture of how the game was going to look. And also, these chipboard pieces they just look a lot better, I think, now, because it's easier to model them on a page than stackable plastic. Stackable plastic was really hard to model. And a personal thing, a little personal triumph, is I learned After Effects, and I was able to model how the game looks in After Effects. So I was able to do all these cool little animations on the Kickstarter page with the game's close to final art, and I think it gives people a really good idea of what the game looks like.
Mm-hmm. And we also have a comment here, a couple of comments actually, about the video, that it's very nice. Lake asks if the video was the same for both Kickstarter campaigns.
Almost. I had to change the B-roll, which is all the shots of people playing the game.
Okay.
So all the shots of me in the city talking, which was incredibly fun to shoot. I had a great time shooting the video with my friend Steve Landau, who runs a YouTube channel called The Dice Breakers.
Mm-hmm.
Steve helps me shoot a bunch of my Kickstarter videos. He's really, really good, and I was really thrilled to be able to shoot with him. And it was so much fun coming up with the script. It was so much fun performing. We knocked it out. Just took the subway. No, he drove. We didn't take the subway. He drove, and we had to park. All around this, which is not easy in Manhattan if you know parking in Manhattan. But we were able to get all these nice shots. Thankfully, the weather agreed with us. It was overcast, which actually helped the lighting a lot, so I wasn't too horribly backlit. But yeah, the video was a lot of fun to shoot. That stuff we could all keep. But all the stuff of people playing the game was all with the old stackable plastic prototype.
Yeah.
And also the old prototype board, which didn't look so good. And even though I wrote in the original video that these are prototype components, just emotionally, when people see it, they still think, oh, the game's going to come with this plain white square board. And that wasn't the case. So I was able to shoot a lot of footage with more current shots of the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
So I took out all the stackable plastic, and except for one gag, there was one gag late that had some shots of the stackable plastic in the background, and I had to crop those out a little bit and do a digital zoom. But other than that, I had to do a little bit of reshooting, and that's how the video changed.
Well, makes sense, because I can literally hear the voices of people saying that it is a misinformation in the video and that they thought that they would get this because they didn't actually read the Kickstarter page.
Oh, yeah. It's so important for things to line up. And even though it was like an under-promising in the original one where you were seeing sort of this very plain graphic design, it just didn't look good enough. And the new version looks a lot better, which I'm really happy. Looks like Zach has an interesting question.
Yeah, about the component name. Now that the stackable plastic is actually out as a component, how would you call the new component?
Okay, there was to catch people up. There's one of the resources in the game is called Ultra Plastic, and it has a few special properties in that if you see Ultra Plastic on a blueprint, that means it's wild, and you can fill it with any resource, with any floor, any color floor. But you can get an ultra plastic piece, and that counts as any color also. So it's a two-way wild. But the third interesting thing about ultra plastic is if you use an ultra plastic piece to fulfill an ultra plastic demand in a blueprint, you get an extra floor. Mm-hmm. So ultra plastic is quite powerful in the game, and it's an important part of the game. And to answer Zach's question, yes, ultra plastic is still ultra plastic. Now, we have a $70,000 stretch goal where if we hit, $60,000 stretch goal, we funded $50,000. At $60,000, all backers will get, in addition to the punch board components that they'll use for the floors and the building components, mm-hmm. they'll get wood components as well, except ultra plastic will be literal plastic cubes, like large green plastic cubes. And I think that's going to look really cool.
And it's gonna be coolly combined with the name, so you got that.
I cannot make something called ultra plastic and make it wood. I mean, I feel it's not so bad if it's punchboard, because punchboard is more abstract. But once you have something in wood, it's a little more literal. And to call something wood plastic was weird. So if we're going to go that far, we may as well go all the way and actually make it plastic.
Very true. Since we have been live for half an hour and we're almost very close to closing up this interview, I would like to ask you to give us a few final words about High Rise and why should people go and back now on Kickstarter?
Well, I've been working on this game since April of 2017. It's really, really well developed, and it's the kind of thing where I keep on seeing things like at PAX South, there was somebody who came by to play it, and they were like, well, I only have an hour, so maybe I'll just play around. I got to meet my friends. And his friends came by and he said, you've guys go ahead. I'm going to finish this game. And I keep on getting reactions like that. People who just get sucked into the game. You know, that player loved the game. I get people who really, really enjoy the game. So people who play it get very excited about it. So I think it's one of those, the proof is in the pudding kind of games. And we're going to hopefully, I'd love to release a print and play. We're just waiting for some of the graphic design to stabilize, and then I can release a print and play, and people can give it a try at home. It's not an easy game to do a print and play because there's so many components in it, which is why the pledge level is $60, it's $59. But it's worth it because not only do you get great gameplay, I mentioned those tenants that you put on the board. Depending on the number of players, there's 3 to 4 tenants in a neighborhood. There's 5 neighborhoods. That's 15 to 20 tenants that come out. But the game comes with 45 tenants.
So
with
great
5
replayability
extra
there,
tenants that all backers get. Yeah, so there's a lot of variability during setup, and each game's going to be a little bit different based on all the tenants that come out. I mentioned before that the game can be more forgiving if there's more tenants that let you lose corruption, but there's other tenants that do wild things. There's one tenant that lets you get as many as, like, you could get a bunch of resources. Like, you could draw 15 floors in one turn with one of the tenants, but you get a ton of corruption with it also. And that one's really, really fun to play with because, you know, you can take a risk, but how much risk do you want to take? And that's the heartbeat of the game. The game is all about trade-offs. It's all about making really, really hard decisions, and players are really enjoying that because the decisions are so meaningful, and you can see the impact of the decisions pretty quickly. So the game's been very, very powerful. And I think the biggest thing is you construct a building, you put it on the table, you put it into space, you get a power, you feel great. Like, you feel like you accomplished that. And a lot of games don't do that. A lot of games can feel like disaster mitigation. It's like, okay, well, we cleaned up that mess, and our reward for that is another mess. Or, you know, they feel a little bit like resource conversion. I speak because sometimes when I try to sit down and design a game, I wind up with stuff like that. That's like, well, this feels okay, but it doesn't feel amazing. This game feels amazing because once you construct a building, it feels really, really good. And I think that's what draws players to it. It's just this emotional high of putting a building down and seeing it physically manifest as this tall thing on a board.
Okay, so to sum up, people, High Rise is a highly strategic game with lots of variability and replayability, as Gil here has described. If you're interested in what you've heard, then make sure to click the link in the description of this video. Thanks so much, Gil, for your time and for presenting High Rise to us. I wish you all the best for this Kickstarter campaign.
Thank you so much, and hi, Asker. Hi, Bree. I saw you just joined.
Yes, they just did. I'm sorry, guys, that we're wrapping up because we reached to an end. If you would like to see more interviews, make sure to like the page and we'll probably catch up next week. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks so much, Helena.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye-bye.